Okay, first things first, go ahead and make sure that your document is set up properly in MLA formatting. Times New Roman font, 12-point font, 1-inch margins, double spaced, with a heading, your name, my name, the course name, the date, and a title centered. And then you'll start your introduction below that. Remember that your introduction needs to start with an attention getter. In this instance, the student used a quote, which also incorporates a statistic. So remember, facts and statistics, quotes, these work as excellent attention getters in an essay. The background information in this introduction should focus primarily on the theme. So this student's theme in one word is the environment. So he writes a little bit about environmental issues in his introduction. And then your introduction will end with a thesis statement. So there's that sample thesis statement yet again. Dr. Seuss published the Lorax in 1971, a year after the Environmental Protection Agency began to argue against the destruction of the environment. Okay? Directly following that, you'll have your biography paragraph. So in your biography paragraph, as well as in your call to write paragraph, and your public's reaction paragraph, you're basically summing up your research. So you're not really doing any argument. You're like, this is the research I did, and here's the information I found. One of the things that I want to talk about that's really important, and you should have learned from the quoting, paraphrasing, and summarizing handout is, even if you're not quoting word for word, if you're using source information, you still need to cite. So if you look at the very first sentence here, it says, the author of the book, The Lorax, who is Dr. Seuss, was born on March 2nd, 1904 in Springfield, Massachusetts. Now, the student didn't know that Dr. Seuss was born in 1904 or in Springfield, Massachusetts. He got that information from a source. So he doesn't quote it, but he paraphrases it, so he still needs to cite it. Let's go ahead and talk a second about in-text citation while we're here. Notice that the student does not have the author of the source here, and that's because there is no author provided. When a source, like a internet article, does not list an author's name, you'll use either the title of the article or an abbreviation of that title in quotation marks instead of the author's last name in the citation. Notice also his use of the word para here. He does this because no page numbers were listed. This is very common for internet articles. They often do not have page numbers. So instead, you'll count the paragraphs. Usually internet articles are very short, so they're only about 5 or 6 paragraphs anyways. So you'll count, right, the paragraphs and then list that paragraph number instead of the page number. So it's P-A-R-A. There should be a period here. So it should be P-A-R-A period, then the paragraph number. Notice that the period for the sentence comes after the citation. Okay, so let's scroll down to the next paragraph. This is the call to write paragraph. Okay, again, this call to write paragraph is basically summing up the research that the student did. So he's not making an argument here. He's just saying, here's the research I did. I'm just summing it up for your convenience. Okay, but again, whenever he provides specific facts or dates, even if he doesn't quote, he needs to provide an in-text citation. So even if he's paraphrasing, he needs to do that. Here he has that parenthetical citation. Notice some things that he does well. So again, for this internet source, there is no author listed. So instead, he provides you the title of the essay, but notice that there's no quotation marks around it. There should be. So this is an error on his part. Make sure that you have quotation marks around the title of your articles, even if you're just providing an abbreviation of the article in your citation. Then he has the paragraph number. Again, this internet article has no page numbers, which is very common. So he needs to use the indication para to tell me which paragraph and to tell me that he's using paragraphs and not page numbers. He should not have para capitalized, however, and there should be a period here after the A because para has been abbreviated from the larger word paragraph. Okay, so let's move on to talk about something else. Okay, so as I mentioned just a minute ago, it's very common for internet articles to not list authors' names and to not list page numbers. And that's going to affect your citation. So here I just want to look at this MLA citation that does not list an author's name. So when an author's name is not listed, you simply skip that step. Usually the first step in creating an MLA citation is last name, comma, first name of the author, period. Then the title of the article. When no author's name is provided, then you start with the title of the article instead, surrounded by quotation marks. Okay? And then when you put this citation in alphabetical order with your others, you'll just use the first letter of the title rather than the first letter of the author's last name. So I just want to make sure that you were aware of that information before we moved on. Okay, so this is a copy of the student's summary paragraph, and I just want to go over some summary do's and don'ts. Remember that when we're creating a summary, we always want to begin with the author, title, and main idea of the text. And notice that the student does that. There's the title of the text, the author's name, and the main idea. Okay. You also want to avoid some things. Don't quote in a summary paragraph. Don't use first person. Don't focus on specifics because we want to condense that material and provide just the basic overview. Okay. So you should actually already have a summary paragraph. You should have a summary of your primary text in your annotated bibliography and then in one of the earlier reading logs that you did. So if you want to go back and copy and paste the summary that was in your annotated bibliography and put that into your research paper, you absolutely can do that. That's your material and you're welcome to reuse and or recycle that for this essay. So these next two paragraphs are the student's analysis paragraphs, and it's in these paragraphs that the student uses the text paragraph organization. So notice that he has a topic sentence here in which he clearly identifies the literary element he's going to focus on. In this case, the once-ler as a symbol, right? He then provides evidence. He then explains that evidence. And then he connects that evidence back to the thesis statement. And he does that both in this paragraph and this one that follows. So please take a second and read back over your text paragraph organization and compare it to these two paragraphs. They're done really well and give you a good example of what you need to be doing. Notice also the student's use of transition here. So between this first analysis paragraph and the second analysis paragraph, the student has what we call a reminder transition, right? Contrast to the symbolism of the once-ler, Dr. Seuss symbolizes the Lorax as the environment's voice of reason. So this first introductory phrase is a reminder transition, reminding readers that we just talked about the once-ler, and now we're going to talk about the Lorax in this paragraph. So remember to create transitions between your paragraphs as well. So every student is required to have at least 2 analysis paragraphs. If for some reason you've created all 8 paragraphs as outlined on the outline on the research paper assignment sheet, and you still haven't made up 4 full pages of text, then you may have a 3rd analysis paragraph. After your analysis paragraphs, but before your conclusion, you'll have a public's reaction paragraph. So this paragraph begins, the story of the Lorax had a rather positive feedback from the public. And then this whole paragraph is about that positive feedback. Notice that the student has incorporated some of their sources. In this case, a student has incorporated some scholarly material into this paragraph. So you may be thinking about how you could incorporate some of the sources that you've used. It's pretty obvious how you're going to use your call to write source and your biography source, but it may be less obvious how you're going to use your scholarly sources. You could think of using them in a couple different ways. You might put them into your call to write paragraph. If in fact your scholarly sources have call to write information, you could put them into your public's reaction paragraph. You could use a quote from your scholarly source as an attention getter in your introduction. You could also use a quote from your scholarly source as a way to support an argument you'd make in your analysis paragraph. So if you were going to do that, you would do that in the sort of X step of the text paragraph organization. You'd have your topic sentence, a quote from the primary text, an explanation of that quote, and then maybe even a quote from a scholarly source that supports your interpretation. So there are a couple different ways you can use scholarly sources, and I just wanted to real quickly point those out, okay? And then last but not least, we have the conclusion here. So remember that conclusions begin by restating the thesis, and the student has done that here. Throughout time, people have destroyed environments for corporate reasons. Dr. Seuss touches on this topic in his book, The Lorax, to prevent any more wildlife areas from being destroyed. So he doesn't repeat his thesis word for word, he restates or revises it, reminds readers of his argument. He sums up his main points, and then he ends with a what next. In this case, he actually offers some suggestions to some problems he raised in his introduction.